Great. So welcome to the second Power Hive webinar of the year. Today's all about customers, which is a bit bizarre, really, because when you think sort of customers should come naturally to recruiters. But when we look at the NorthStar business health check data, customers is actually the second weakest area where business owners and leaders tend to perform. So there's only marketing that's slightly worse. So I think this is quite good timing. I was chatting to a business owner just before Christmas, and I asked Phil to give me 3 bits of advice that he thought owners should be focusing on 2024. And straight away he said, number 1, Paul, is customers. Number 2 is customers, and number 3 is customers. So I thought that was quite interesting feedback from a business owner. So maybe 2024 is all about customers. So I think obviously we all know the importance of customers. What's really interesting is that 63% of recruitment agency owners do not measure customer experience. 63% don't measure the customer experience. And if that isn't enough, 32% of recruitment agencies haven't held a service review in the last 2 years with their top 3 customers. And only 16% have done that in the last 10 to 12 months. So customer meetings seems to be a bit of a hotspot. Not so sure if that's a hangover from the COVID days when we had to do everything virtually. Maybe we just haven't got back to old habits or not. But that's certainly an area to explore. And hopefully Miles and Julian will have something to say on that in a second. And of the top, when you look at client segmentation as an issue, just under half of agency owners haven't segmented the client base in the last 12 months. So loads to go out there. Obviously, customers, really important. If you've got really good customer relationships, it blocks out the corporate competition, helps you to cross-sell, gain referrals, get repeat business. Apparently, according to the staffing industry analysts, 70 to 80% of recruitment companies, their business comes from repeat business and repeat customers. Interestingly, because Miles and I believe only 16% of agencies actually achieve that. So a slightly different view. And another really interesting stat from McKinsey, they're saying that you're 60 to 70% more likely to sell to an existing customer than a new one. So obviously selling to existing ones is really, really positive and should be a lot easier to do. So we're about to kick off the webinar. If you haven't already realized, I've got Miles Lloyd with me, who's my co-founder with NorthStar. And I've got Julian, who runs a fantastically interesting company that measured customer experience. And I'm sure Julian will be giving us some of his insights shortly. So we're going to kick off prompt. And I'm going to turn to you, Miles, for the first question. So, Miles, from a strategic perspective, so we're just going to start at the macro level first. From a strategic perspective, what are the biggest challenges you believe face recruitment owners and leaders, and why is implementing a customer-centric strategy really important?
There are multiple things to consider here, but I suppose to try and summarize it in the limited time that we've got, for me, I think most, and I'm not saying all, but most recruitment organizations are very focused on contingent-led business, no win, no fee. Very much drives a short-term sort of mentality. It's all about getting jobs on, getting good CVs out, getting placements. Have I achieved my target this month? Right, here we go again. Another month starts, bang, 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 bang. And what I find, and I think quite often in those organizations, and that is the majority, is nobody's spending time working on the customers, thinking about who have we actually got, what potential's actually within these, which ones are right for us, and which ones aren't right for us, which ones actually are a pain in the backside, and we should be moving out the door. So I think for me, you know, the first thing all organizations should be doing is taking a step back, looking at who they're working with, who they've worked with for the last 12 months, who they've worked with for the previous 12 months, and maybe even going back 3 years, and just start doing a bit of bloody analysis around those customers. Who are we cross-selling to and why? How many are new? How many repeat? You know, you talked about the benefits and merits of repeat business, but understanding what latent potential sits within customers is something hardly anybody does particularly well, because it takes time and effort that isn't all about hitting the target at the end of the month. And I think that's the biggest challenge. Mindset.
Miles, just a quick one. Would you have any key customer metrics on your board dash report, monthly board dash report?
In terms of myself, I think it depends where an organization is in their journey. But for me, in terms of business mix, I always like to be able to see, right, of deals done, how many is new, how many is repeat, how many is cross-sell. I think those are critical. And cross-sell could be product cross-sell, or it could be where you've got certain silos or sectors and divisions. It could be interdivisional cross-sell. I think those things probably, for me, are really, really important.
Cool. Julian, if I turn to you, what from your experience, what are some of the specific customer metrics or KPIs that you see agencies either using, or you talk to agencies about maybe implementing, and how easily is it to really track the customer experience?
Yeah, look, I think the first thing before you actually sort of going into the metrics themselves, it's really thinking, what is it that you want to measure, and why is it that you want to measure that? So, in terms of what you want to measure, it's like, how happy are your customers? A lot of what recruiters do, and they do a really good job at, is your activity metrics. So what they're doing, their sales activity, their finance metrics in terms of what the result was. But what you want to look at is what's going to happen next. And that's what you get a lot of the time from your experience metrics. So how happy are they with your service? Are they unhappy with your service? The details of what went wrong and what went right. Who did they like in terms of who they were working with? Who didn't they like within your organization? And are you putting accountability on that? Why you want to know those things is because you want to know whether they're essentially, the core thing is whether they're going to spend with you again. Are you going to be able to forecast on those businesses? A lot of businesses can say, look, we did say 3 million, 4 million NFI last year. So next year we're going to do 5 or 6. But if 30% of those customers were really unhappy with you, then, your projections are going to be way out, because those people are detractors of your brand. They're not going to work with you again. You also, that's the risk. It's the churn rate. A really difficult thing to do in recruitment is measuring churn. In the SaaS industry, churn is like, if you're over 2-3%, stop sales and marketing and focus on SaaS, because otherwise you're a leaky bucket that can't scale. And that's a massive, massive focus there. In recruitment, it's really hard because you don't have subscriptions where people just stop paying. You've got people who just say, like, we're not recruiting right now, or we're doing it internally, these types of things. So I really focus on, NPS and Net Promoter Score to do that, because it encompasses a whole lot of those things, but it's very simple, and you can pull a huge amount from it. In terms of NPS and Net Promoter Score, I guess I'll give a bit of an overview in terms of how that actually works. But the absolute core thing that you're asking there is, how likely are you to recommend this business to a friend or a colleague? So what you're trying to measure is the future intent of the organization. Are they going to work with you again? Did they enjoy working with you? Would they, introduce you to somebody else? These are all about future, revenue generating activities. How we then calculate the score is their responses out of 10, and you're categorizing your respondents into 3 different areas. So you've got your detractors. That's anybody that's giving you a 0 to 6 score. Essentially, these people are unlikely to ever work with the business again because they've had a bad experience. So you can't put them into your forecast for the coming year unless you're going back to sort of turn that relationship around. Your passives are your people are giving you a 7 and 8 out of 10. Typically, you think these people, like you, they had a really good experience, but these are the people that are susceptible to all of the other thousands of recruiters that are targeting them as well. The 9s and 10s, these are your promoters. These are the advocates that are, you're going to have really good lifetime value with them. They're going to come back to you to work with you again, and they're going to let you land and expand within their businesses. So once you get those categorizations right, it lets you take the next step in terms of where the work needs to go. Can you react to the negative ones? Can you take advantage of the opportunities with the positive ones?
Julian, I'm probably going to tee you up here, but there's a fact from Bain and Company which says that customer-centric companies are 60% more likely to grow faster Is that something you see? Do you see maybe a connection between those agencies that are doing really well and the ones that actually measure the customer experience?
Yeah, I mean, look, you can't improve what you don't measure. That's like a sort of a very well-known sort of quote. You have to start measuring things to know, how you're going to actually improve it, and then see what that actual improvement is. But sort of going back to that point, sort of from Bain and Co. There's an amazing book. I send it to a lot of our new customers called Winning on Purpose. So I'd encourage everyone to read that. The chap who invented MPS, Fred Reichheld, wrote that. And it is a huge amount of information and data from multiple industries talking about growth rate, and the difference in success that businesses have that have incredibly high MPS. About 20 years ago, people didn't care as much about it, but they talk a lot about a massive study in that book where essentially the chap who wrote it, Fred Reichheld, he invested in a huge amount of businesses that had very high MPS. I think it was in sort of the noughties, sort of like 2000, 2010. And he outperformed every single fund at the time by about 10 times. From sort of 2010 onwards, MPS became the universally recognized way of measuring customer experience. You've got like 70-80% of the Fortune 1000, the biggest businesses in America, utilize MPS as a guiding growth metric. But it has been only some recruitment businesses that have really taken that on board. They still have a very short-term focused on, just sales and not long-term lifetime value of a customer that you get from doing things that, might not lead to a direct financial outcome straight away, but building that relationship means they're going to come back again and again. They're going to bring people with them as well. So yeah, that sort of stat, that fact, that quote, that's everything that we're about as a business. Is you're treating people well and you're fostering relationships to grow your business going forward. It's the best way to do it.
Miles, have you got an example of a recruiter that has done exactly what Julian's just said? Have you come across any real live examples
with regards to utilizing MPS?
Yeah, and performance. So what?
Yeah,
what
I mean, look, let's talk about two things. I mean, in terms of MPS, I love all that stuff. By the way, it works. Simple as that. Do it well, do it right. It works. And when we talk about customers, think about your internal customers as well as your external ones. Because organisations that do this well follow that plan, do, check, act approach. Honestly, drives performance. There's a Power Hive member, Evolution, over in Warrington that use MPS, have used it for years extensively, publish their results externally as well. And why wouldn't you? It's a great tool to benchmark yourself. But I think for me, one of the key things about what's just been talked about here is the ability to, it's understanding where everybody I talk to, talk about your recruitment agents. Oh, we're brilliant at service. Yeah, we're excellent. We're better than most. Well, prove it. Because unless you're using this, you can't. But once you can prove where you are and you know where you are, empirical evidence, then you just decide, are we happy there or do we need to shift it? And if so, by how much? In using MPS, you can benchmark against best in class and stuff like that. So it's brilliant. But, customer-centric approach. Let me give some examples where clients have joined this journey. We worked with a business over a number of years based in Stretford, South Manchester. And they took a real customer-centric approach, and it took them a while. They were a bit of an oil tanker, so it took them a while to turn the corner. 5-year results, basically, their top line decreased by 10%. Their bottom line increased tenfold as a result of getting customer-centric approach. And what do I mean by that is they were high level, low margin, churn, just kept being busier, and never making any more money. So we started to talk to their customers. What is it you actually want? Where could we add more value? And all of a sudden, 5 years later, 1/3 of their business was in the swim lane it was 5 years previous. 1/3 of it, and this is at a GP level, not at a turnover level, 1/3 of it was in blue collar, so skilled, contingent, temporary, flexible labour. And then 1/3 of it was in white collar permanent recruitment. And it drove cash to the bottom line. There's just a real example of understanding where you're wasting your time, what's costing you time, and therefore sucking the life out of your organization, focusing on the ones that do well. So I think that's probably a really good example of just getting your house in order and start engaging with clients. And this is the challenge, isn't it? It's stepping back and asking customers about, right, what do you want? Where are your pain points? What are your challenges? How can we work with you to help make your life easier, to do the stuff you need us to do to give you good results? You know, and that's a real mindset thing again, isn't it?
Yeah, cool.
I know we haven't got ages, so I'd add one example to that as well, because it's a really good one. But one of our investors, Alex Elliott, he's incredibly passionate about this type of thing because of just the impact that it had on their entire journey. So they were sort of scaling in the healthcare industry with Liquid Personnel, with his business partner. This is a while ago now, like 10 years or so ago. And they just reached that hurdle of sort of 40, 50 heads that many recruitment businesses, if lucky enough, you know, get to. But getting beyond that is really, really tough. And when they analysed everything, you know, they really focused on improving, but it was very sales hungry, classic recruitment culture. And when they analysed it, they realised it was just that churn year on year. And when they wanted to focus on just repeat business, you know, and they focused on customer service, implementing NPS, it's the biggest thing that he said shifted that entire business. From then onwards, they drove that throughout the culture in terms of the whole company, still very sales focused, but massively focused on retention, you know, referrals, that type of thing. And they went on to become the #1 in the healthcare market. And they had a huge private equity exit at the end of that. And I think it's one of the best examples of, you know, a shift in approach, and then what the outcome actually was of that at the end of it.
Cool. Fab. Sean's just posted a question just around, will we talk about some possible solutions? So maybe just over the next sort of 15 minutes, we can just maybe share any solutions or any practical ideas. That'd be fab. So I'll just talk a little bit around defining the customer relationship, and Julian and Miles have both talked about, you know, what gets measured gets done, and, you know, how can you improve something if you're not measuring it. So one of the really simple tasks and exercises that I've always done when I was at the Coalface Recruitment was just segmenting the client base, categorizing it, and categorizing your client relationships into one of 5 buckets. So is it at the contact stage? Are you at acceptance? Are you at the trusted stage? Or are you at the loyalty or advocacy? So 5 buckets: contact, acceptance, trust, loyalty, advocacy. There's a description that goes against each one of those. I haven't got time to go through it in detail, but if anybody wants it, by the way, they can just message me through LinkedIn or direct, and I'll respond. So categorize your relationships into one of those 5 buckets, and then start to think about how you can then move the dial and shift it from maybe contact to acceptance, or acceptance to trust. The key here is to try and get as many relationships into that trust bucket as what you possibly can. You won't get every relationship to loyalty and advocacy. Some, they just won't allow it, they don't want it, or time and cost might prevail. But the trust bit is where you should get the majority. So thinking about the trusted relationships, Julian, what can agencies do to try and get to that trusted level where they're more than just an order taker and they're starting to add some real value?
Yeah, I think in terms of, like, you know, just broadly to answer that, you know, you can say it's kind of doing the things, and this is said a lot in the sort of the startup world as well, tech startups and everything, is doing things that aren't necessarily scalable. Like, everybody wants to do things that you can automate, you can do all over the place, but what types of things can you do that are unscalable? That type of thing is, you know, reaching out to people, sending them, you know, a book because you think it's going to be really useful for them. All of these types of little things add up to building really, really strong, you know, relationships, and that can be applied in a huge amount of ways. In a more sort of practical sense, and an answer probably coming from me and my perspective with talent analytics, it's you know, looking at the data piece. And again, on that point, the main focus is, what are you giving them that isn't going to lead to a direct financial outcome now, but is incredibly useful to that business? So when you're looking at data and you're measuring data on, you know, candidates that are going to an organization, you'll probably start to find out that a lot of those, maybe a huge amount, 50% of candidates dropped out after the first interview themselves. You know, we've got feedback from all of them where they said they didn't enjoy, you know, the conversation with the interviewer. They had this feedback. They hated the waiting room. You know, I know that things like that kind of stupid, but then you can go into, you know, way more detail on that in terms of the attitude, you know, the follow-up, you know, they were missold the role from the recruiter internally. When you start feeding that back, and you've got sentiment analysis as well, from multiple bits of feedback from candidates, and you're giving that to them saying, this is what you're doing wrong, and we're a consultant and we're letting you know that, that then becomes hugely valuable. Another thing is like SLAs, like service level agreements. We talk about NPS is just broadly recognized. HR talent people know all about NPS and that service standard plus 70 being a world-class level of service. You can say to them, look, we've got a commitment, the experience, of the candidates that we represent to you are going to have an amazing experience with us. We're an extension of your brand, and we're going to feed you back the data on what their experience was like interviewing with you via us. What are our competitors doing within that space? How are they doing in terms of their data? More often than not, they're going to go, well, we're not getting anything from your competitors in terms of data. So it puts you on the front foot, and it opens up really, really good conversations where they realize that you're a lot more than just somebody who's sending them a candidate to fill a job. All of those types of things are incredibly useful, and we do a lot of that. Is like trying to feed you that information as much as possible so you can use it in that type of way.
Miles, what's your number one top tip for agencies to build long-term trusted loyalty or advocacy level relationships? Just one top tip.
I think you've really got to invest time in those clients. You've got to understand them, and it's relationships at multiple levels. What I mean by that is quite often, again, because of the churny nature of the recruitment business and the short-term mentality on fee income, we've got a great relationship with that customer, but it might be a consultant with a hiring manager or a consultant with all respect, an HR business partner. We very rarely have proper relationships at a more senior level. And I think understanding, and this isn't about all customers where you do this, but who are the ones that are important to us around the relationship mapping? Where are the ones where there is real potential for long-term partner type of approach? Let's start getting into those customers. Let's understand some of those senior decision makers, and let's start having proper, meaningful conversations. And it's not about, you got any jobs, mate? This is about talking to them about the stuff that matters to them. Talking about pain points, time to hire, cost per hire, quality of hire, retention levels, talking about the challenges around talent attraction, any topical issues. We've got to start exciting people. So the conversation we need to have with a CPO or HRD is a slightly different conversation than we have with the CEO. But with all respect, again, those people aren't going to necessarily engage with somebody that's tagged as a recruitment consultant. We need to get our asses as leaders of recruitment businesses out there talking within that peer community, business owner to business owner, leader to leader, about stuff that's going on, that's happening. And I echo what Julian said. More agencies need to be pulling together great data, great insights about what's going on in the sector, in the market, around talent. Share that on a regular basis. You'll build up a community around you instantly.
Yeah, I'll just share a real life example off the back of that, because I think it segues in really nicely. And one of the last big customers that I won a quite substantial piece of business with was a customer called Collinson's. They run the airport lounges, and I used a relationship to refer me into the global HR director, and the premise of why I wanted time with the HR director was to share global insights, to share thought leadership, data around what was happening to the workforce in 5 years' time, what HR leaders should be thinking about, some of the challenges that they were probably going to see over the next 2 or 3 years. And it was an amalgamation of some of the data that you've just articulated there. But, unashamedly, you used to read a lot of reports from people like McKinsey and Gartner and CIPD. And, I'd share some of that information. I'd always reference it in the bottom left-hand corner. Maybe the text was a little bit small, so maybe you couldn't read it that well. But it was all about, as Miles said, trying to add value. We did this with Miles and I did this with a company out in Ireland back end of last year, and we helped them sort of pull some sort of data and slide deck together, some thought leadership. And one of the leaders in there, emailed us not long after, and he just said, "Why have I not been doing this earlier?" And he was suddenly finding that he was getting through 80% of the doors to the senior person and getting proper time in the diary to share some of these insights and thought leadership. So from a door opening perspective, if that's not being done, then I always think business development is hard, because why would a client give you their time if there's not something that you're going to help them with or solve a problem with? So using that practical data and sharing information and intel that's going to help them enormously can certainly be a great way to move the dial on the customer relationship model, but also get you those more senior level relationships as well. Just conscious of time, guys, so we'll flick through the other questions fairly quickly. Miles, what's the biggest time waster for recruitment agency owners and leaders?
That's easy. That's an easy one.
I'll give you one.
I'll give you one word answer, and then I'll qualify it. It's customers. It's customers that aren't contracted to you, don't care about you, will say they're going to work one way and then work another, say they're going to give you feedback, then don't give you feedback, tell you that you're the only one working on it and you're not. And there's so many time wasters out there, and they're like vampires of time, vampires of energy. What we've got to do is understand who are the ones that are the dogs, the work that we do with clients around Boston Matrix, but who are the dogs? Let's get rid of those ones. Let's find the ones who have real opportunity and potential to help us grow. But for me, time is the one thing we don't have enough of. So again, coming back to what Julian's saying, making sure that we're really using data, we're efficient, we're effective. Conversion rates are good at all critical ratios within that recruitment process. Because if you're not understanding what your conversion ratios are at each step of your recruitment process. I've been into businesses, and I know you have, we've been together, Paul, where, you've got one team, converting, let's just use the top level one, converting 1 in 5 jobs, another one converting 1 in every 2 jobs. Well, those are in the same business. So what are they doing that those guys aren't doing? And therefore, let's get that sharing knowledge going on, So that's the key for me. Time is everything, isn't it? It really is.
The Boston Matrix, by the way, is one of the 3 ways in which Miles and I segment a client base. So the reference to the dogs there is the clients that end up in the sort of bottom left-hand corner, and clients that you potentially may need to exit or certainly spend a lot less time with. And it's a great way to work out where to spend your time and how to move the dial. Julian, just coming then on to sort of time wasters and how people free up time. What have you seen, or where have you seen agencies do it particularly well around using either process, workflows, technologies to streamline processes, automate things, and free up time to get this customer-centric bit absolutely nailed?
Yeah, this is the moment I'll chat to you a little bit about talent analytics, I guess, and what we do. I think like a lot of what Miles is saying is the actual relationship piece that you have to do. You have to be speaking to people, you have to be doing all of those things, and you can't ever let that drop. But there is a lot of things you can do as well on the technology side, where you're automating this and you're getting lots of valid data, which allows you to direct your attention to the most needed things. So before we go into sort of the customer experience metrics on this question, the number one thing that we see with all businesses that we begin working with for the first time, and the reason that they can't run very successful customer experience programs, is massive data integrity issues with recruiters. So if you're not updating things on the system, and your consultants aren't doing it, and you don't have a culture of doing it, you can't run successful automated programs. And this relates to many other automations that will link to that. So the first thing that we look at is your email accuracy. About, I think it's 64% of emails for candidates and clients are incorrect for our trial customers. So that means 36% of people are never going to get an NPS survey because you don't have the right email on there. So first of all, get that sorted. It's a really easy one. All of our customers are now at 98, 99%, and they constantly keep that up to date. That's the most simple thing. If you don't get that right, you're missing 30, 40%. You're not going to get any of the data back, and you're not going to get credible data. Your response rates will be low. The second thing is the timing of when you send things out. So doing the right triggers. You can't get good timing of sending a survey to someone and getting a response and a high response rate if you send it at the wrong time. If you don't reject candidates on the system, if you don't move candidates to interview on the system, there is no CRM trigger to measure the experience at the right time. So you go for an interview, you don't get the job, you don't get any feedback, and then 4 or 5 weeks later, you get a survey about it. You're like, you're not going to respond to that. If you think of any scenario when you give feedback to someone, it's near that moment. The timing is so important. If you don't get your data integrity right and it's not consistently right, all of these automations and triggers don't work that effectively. The next part of it is that automation piece. Getting it out obviously at the right time. It's saving you time because it's a constant flow of feedback that's coming into you. So you're not doing anything because you've got that upfront bit right. You're getting in, this person's a promoter of you, they've given you an amazing review, so you can share that on LinkedIn, really positive, praise the consultant, highlight that internally, and show that that's what you want to do in your culture. And with the negative feedback that's flowed through, what's your process to respond to it? How are you going to defend your brand against it? But you want to just be reacting to these bits of information that are being delivered straight to you, not, most people just aren't even aware of them. So it becomes a much bigger problem down the line when that customer never spends with you and they churn, and that was part of your projections. A big thing that we do now is AI. So we're analyzing all of the qualitative feedback that we get in, and then we send you reports weekly and more detailed ones monthly as well. So every single bit of written feedback that you're getting that's flowing in, we analyze the whole thing. We're pulling out sentiment analysis of that. People are saying you're kind, responsive, etc. These are the key issues that they have. They feel that, the invoice system's, really poor, even though the recruitment process was great. Candidates not getting feedback, whatever it is, it's going to highlight who is and who isn't doing the right things. And then the final one, I know I'm going on one here, but is communications and notifications. So when you get those set up correctly, if you're using things like Slack and Teams, and you are flowing, all of these workflows and feedbacks in there, it triggers the right behavior to happen, in your consultant. So it's not just, you can do a bit of classroom training, you can tell people they need to do this, but everyone knows recruiters eventually, are under a lot of pressure and they'll forget to do things. If you can give them little triggers, little notifications directly through channels like Slack and Teams, then it will trigger that process of what needs to happen next. And that's a really, really important one as well. And how you change culture and celebrating in like shout out channels, good feedback, that will make people want to do it again and again and again.
Just as you were talking there were two memories that came flashing back from the last few weeks. For those of you that don't know me, I'm a massive fan of rail companies, and in particular Northern Rail. I'm always being asked to fill in their customer survey, which I always do, by the way. And one of the last questions is, would you like to be contacted? And I always say, yes, please. But nobody's ever contacted me. So it's already made a bad customer experience even worse by the fact that they've asked me for feedback and nobody's picked the phone up after. And I just wonder, and I don't know whether this is something you measure or not, Julian, but I just wonder, when there is any negative feedback, do any business owners actually pick the phone up to that candidate or the customer?
And actually 100%. Like, this is the easiest way to change any business. It's the easiest process to implement is, responding to negative feedback. So first of all, you've got to collect it and you've got to have it coming in. All those things I was talking about, you're not going to get it if you don't get all of those things right. But once you do get it right, it's automated and it's going to come through to you. There's a chap called Callum Lyle who started a business called Zest. And he's done incredibly well. He's only been going for a year, but they've absolutely smashed it. And the whole business is focused on experience. I'd encourage you to have a look at his LinkedIn. But one thing that he's always said to me is the easiest way to develop a good relationship is how you respond to negative feedback. And people who really high level in hospitality talk about this over and over again. Is like, the good analogy is, if someone spills a glass of wine on you in a restaurant, it's an awful experience, right? It's ruined everything. But then what happens after that shows everything about the organization. It's the best chance. You've got every opportunity now to deliver outstanding experience. Can we get you this? Someone else comes over to clean it up. They're going to give you something free. The chef prepares something for you. This entire team collectively working because they're so devastated you've had a poor experience. If you were a candidate and you go, I never got any feedback, and you get one call from a manager going, look, we pride ourselves on experience. We're incredibly sorry about that. We never wanted that. You know, how's your job search going? This is what I think you could do. That person's like, I've never ever had an experience like that with a recruitment business, and this sticks. That's generating an army of promoters. When you do that over and over again, there's a culmination of that happening through all of your consultants. That is where you get scaling from, because you're just developing, you know, a huge amount of people that, you know, really love your business and want to work with you again and appreciate how you made them feel, essentially.
Yeah, it's really interesting what you've just said, because whenever I book a holiday or a hotel, whatever, I always look at the comments, but it's not the comments that I look at, it's the response from the hotel or the owner that I look at, and that determines whether I book or not. But it's absolutely the response, without a shadow of a doubt. So, couple of last questions. Keith had just asked a question in the chat just regarding how many touch points on the process would you promote, and what's considered good in terms of following up, and at what point does it become pestering. So 2 questions there, and then the third one, and Julian, if I can come to you first, the third one that I just ask is, what does a good process look like, and how many touch points are there, and what should you be measuring along the journey?
How many touch points in terms of how often you should measure feedback? Is that?
Yeah, touch points just in terms of process, and what would you measure along the way?
So one big thing that I talk about as well is that people don't measure any feedback, any experience at all, and then suddenly they go, you know what, actually we've got to do this and we've got to do loads of it, and it gets to the point where it's actually really annoying, and you're ruining the experience by, you know, sending people 1,000 reminders, asking them 1,000 questions, and it's why that, you know, I have this big focus on NPS, because it gives you a lot of information that you can draw from getting this one response from somebody. You want to trigger it at the most critical time, and you want to get the response to it, and it then gives you very comparative and credible data, because you're getting, you know, the number of responses from the same business, you know, related, or a number of NPS responses to an individual consultant. When you start going, how was the job registration process? You know, how was the interview process? This is automated emails. How was, you know, the invoicing process? It just starts to get super annoying, and you actually are having a detrimental impact. And you get survey fatigue. People are sick of getting too much stuff, but they're more than happy to give you feedback when you put a good bit of effort in with them. So I would try and reduce the amount of touch points and the amount of things you're sending. Don't just think more is better, because it will actually mean you get really mismatch of information coming back. That is very uncomparable when you start doing that, because, you know, some people respond to 1 question, some people don't respond to any, some respond to 5. How do you then get really comparative data when you're doing that? You know, so that's what, and it's why, you know, it's been around for 10, 20 years now, but it's why it's become the universally recognized way of doing it. Is keeping it simple and not annoying people is really, really important.
Julian, have you seen anything? When I was at Interquest, I did something around offering an incentive for people to fill in surveys. So at the time it was, you know, we'll donate, I can't remember what the amount was, it was, you know, somewhere between £2 and £5 for each completed survey. So it was something like, I think it was £5 actually. So I think it was like £5 to charity for 5 minutes of your time, I think was the slogan. Have you seen anything work well in terms of incentive? Because managers in particular, clients, the uptake rate on clients filling these in can sometimes be quite low, tend to be higher on candidates. Have you seen anything work well other than what I've just mentioned, where people have offered some sort of incentive and the uptake's been better?
Yeah, look, I mean, if you offer people money, they're more likely to do something, right? But like, I wouldn't encourage you to go down that route of offering people like money particular. What I would say is really useful is, and something that I've done a lot before, and this isn't for automated NPS, is about just consistently getting lots of results. It's super simple, it takes them a second. If you're wanting detailed information from somebody, a really, really good thing that I've done in the past is, you know, you're highlighting somebody due to their level of importance, which makes everybody feel good. So it's like, look, we're doing, you know, a survey with some of the top performing HR directors from around the country. And we wanted to get your thoughts into these things because we're putting together a report on what HRDs can do to improve in 2025. We'd love you to contribute to that, and we're going to send you that report and this, etc. afterwards, and we're going to note you as a contributor. That is free. You're going to do the report and stuff anyway. Those types of things, there's a really nice cycle to that. That's a market, can be, it's part marketing, it's part actually getting the research and the information, it's part utilizing that in your BD because you can then use all of those stats that you've gained, in the future, those types of things. My first ever job that, and don't hate me for it, was working for Hayes in Sydney. And they were the biggest company in Australia at the time. And I was recruiting HR and then eventually executive HR. And the best campaigns that they ever had out there was DNA of a HRD. I called every HRD and asked them to contribute to that. And that is basically how I built my entire business, was that campaign. We're going down a bit of a different route there, but I wouldn't be offering money for these types of things, or cool. If it's something small, maybe. But
cool. The money, by the way, went to charity. It wasn't the money to that.
Individual. It's just sort of element. Try and come up with a consistent thing where it's going to work over and over again. You can't really scale it doing that way.
Yeah. Fab. Miles, last question. Is there any pitfalls, anything you've seen people do or recruiters or owners do and it's maybe not led to a positive outcome? So anything, lessons learned to share?
I think doing this thing well, in terms of, again, this macro thing is all about customer centric, isn't it? We're talking a lot about NPS, but it is critical. And I feel that, getting something automated, doing it well at the right time. If you're a hiring manager that's doing multiple hires over an extended period, you don't want to get, every time you get a CV, 10 minutes later, 5 seconds later, you've got a bloody message getting you to rate your experience. It's just painful, isn't it? And this is where automation's important, is getting it to happen easily, simply at a time when people can engage. But I think one of the pitfalls is when do we do it? At what point in the process, the workflow, the journey do we do it? I see far too many agencies who even use NPS, so they're enlightened enough to use NPS, but only doing it on candidates that have been successful. Only doing it with clients that have actually paid some money because they've hired somebody through you. It's like, well, hang on a minute. Considering 99% of people don't get the job, so you're doing it too late in the process. You're screwing and skewing the output. So do it at a point where you're having an experience of service, and that might sit a bit further down. It might be when a CV is being represented to a client, or when you're doing that for the candidate. So I think that's one of the key things. What you do when you do it, and importantly, doing it not too often, but often enough so you can start to look at trends. Because doing this bloody thing once a year, forget it, waste of time. Doing something quarterly. Right, what's shifting? Where's it shifting? Why is it shifting? Why have we got different divisions doing different things? That's the power of having the data. So that's important.
Cool.
I would add to that in terms of what Miles was saying there about people cherry picking and only measuring feedback. There's by all means measure feedback on place candidates, but it goes back to the very first thing I was saying. It's like, why are you even doing this? Are you doing this as a marketing exercise because you want social proof and it makes you feel good and you want to put testimonials out there and you want to shout about a score? Are you actually doing it to identify what's wrong with your business and how you're going to change it, and the fact that there's actually hundreds of people that have a negative impact with your business every year? Like, what I show a lot of the time is these two agencies that are about 50 heads and have about 6,000 candidates that they have a significant interaction with each year, and the difference of promoters on one and another at the end of it. 80-90% of those candidates are not going to have been placed by you. So if you're ignoring all of them, you're ignoring 6,000 humans, people that are walking around in the companies you want to work with, influencing all the people you want to influence, talking to all of their network. It's sort of just forgotten and brushed under the carpet a lot of the time.
Cool. Just one quick last question, which is coming from Kevin. So I'm going to come to you, Julian. Are there any recommendations where one can go in order to set up the Net Promoter Score? from a
Yeah.
process perspective?
I mean, yeah, come to me. You can go to our website, www.talentanalytics.co.uk, fill in Get Started free. If you put that you were referred by the Power Hive, we didn't actually arrange a NorthStar. We didn't arrange this before, but we'll sort out a collective discount for any of the members of this webinar and things like that. And also, I'm sure the guys will send you my details afterwards. And just feel free to reach out directly to me and book in a time, and we'll chat about what we do and how we help. We integrate, just so everyone knows, with Bullhorn, Job Adder, and Vincherry. We're considering a number of others. We've got a couple of partners that are going to help us with that as well. So if you're not one of those three, let us know as well, and we'll see what we can do.
And having looked at your platform with you prior to this call, I was like, wow, what we didn't get into is just how you use the data to actually unpick individual performance and then use that to target, well, help people improve, but on an individual basis. That part of the platform, along with lots of other bits, I thought was absolutely fascinating. So I'm sure if anybody's got any further questions, they'll reach out to you direct or go and have a look around your website. We're out of time. Thank you so much for everybody that's joined the webinar. Time's gone so quick, hasn't it? The next webinar is on the 6th of March, and it's all about the power of people and sales. So if you haven't already, please do sign up for that one. Other than that, I'm off to put the heating on and a fleece, not quite as big as Miles, but we're getting ready for the snow up here. Have a great afternoon. Thank you, everybody, for joining. And thank you in particular, Miles and Julian. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, chaps. Really enjoyed it. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.